Firestorm from yesterday. Let's talk about the huge foreign policy events of today. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson met with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and President Trump met with the leader of NATO, where they covered a lot of ground.
In facing our common challenges, we must also ensure that NATO members meet their financial obligations and pay what they owe. Many have not been doing that. Right now, we're not getting along with Russia at all. We may be at an all-time low in terms of relationship with Russia. This is built for a long period of time. But we're going to see what happens. Right now, the world is a mess. But I think by the time we finish, I think it's going to be a lot better place to live. And I can tell you that, speaking for myself, by the time I'm finished, it's going to be a lot better place to live in, because right now it's nasty.
The president also said that he no longer thinks NATO is obsolete, but he added that it had to do more to fight global terrorism. And you may remember that even as far back as 2015, after the terrorist attack in Paris, Bill laid out a plan.
NATO should declare war on ISIS, and in doing so, that alliance could then move into Syria, set up safe zones for refugees, and a huge problem might begin to be solved. If Syrians in danger are protected by NATO forces on the ground, there's no reason for them to go to Turkey, Europe, or America.
Joining us now from Washington, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, now former press secretary, current press secretary in the no-spin zone. So we'll see how we do. Sean, would President Trump be able to support something like Bill was describing, that NATO would get involved and see if they could figure out a way to combat ISIS and solve this problem in Syria?
I think there's a lot of great discussion today surrounding that. And I think that you saw the Secretary General discuss his commitment to further rooting out terrorism and ISIS through the region. There's a lot of commitment. He talked about how there are 5 countries that are currently living up to their 2% of GDP. They require what they're supposed to be committing to be part of NATO. That number is going to rise to 8. I think we're seeing a financial commitment as well as an overall strategic commitment from NATO to make sure that we combat ISIS.
It is unusual. President Trump doesn't always admit that he changed his position, and today he was very blunt, and he said to the cameras and to the audience there that he used to think it was obsolete and he no longer believes that. Do you have any more insight or background on his thinking?
Well, I think, it's not so much what necessarily he's done as what they've done. As I mentioned, I think he's made NATO's relevance and the commitment of others to live up to their financial commitments for too long. I think many countries have gotten a free ride. The commitment that every NATO member makes is that 2% of their GDP will be put towards defense. Most countries don't live up to that. The U.S. exceeds it. And if you realize that five of the NATO countries have gotten their 2% commitment, that under the current NATO Secretary General, and he admitted that in large part to President Trump, that number is continuing to rise. Overall, we've seen a 3.8% increase in NATO funding, in funding from countries in terms of defense, and we expect 8 of those countries now overall to make that commitment to 2%. So because of the President's stance on this and commitment and making this a priority, I think you're seeing NATO move closer and closer to where it should be, and its relevance gaining steam.
To that threshold. Nikki Haley today, the UN ambassador, she had a tweet after the voting that took place around 3 o'clock. If I could just pull this up real quickly, because I thought it was so pithy, so to speak. She said, after today's vote to hold Syria accountable, it's a strong day for the U.S., a weak day for Russia, a new day for China, and doomsday for Assad. She's basically putting Assad on notice, and to the point that I think is the White House now saying to Assad, all right, your move, what's next for you, because we are changing the dynamics of this relationship.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that one little phrase, but let's try it for a sec. I think you saw, starting last week, the President had the President of Egypt, King Abdullah, in, and then met with President Xi, all along conducting a strike in Syria that really reasserted the United States' place and prominence in the fight against ISIS and the conflict that's going on in Syria, that largely won praise from the world community and bipartisan praise here at home. But what that also did is those relationships that he built down at Mar-a-Lago over those 2 days with President Xi, you saw Russia stand today with the United States because of the relationship that I think he and the arguments and persuasiveness of this president, and really isolate Russia in their stance with Syria. Syria continues to find itself and its actions in a very, very small group of folks, and mostly states aside from Russia that are failed states. I think the victory today of getting China to side with us is a huge diplomatic victory for this president and for our country.
Because they abstained from that vote at the United Nations, and that is different for sure. Let me ask you something about one of the things, in fact, this morning it was even talked about in the museum event that you participated in, that there's frustration with any White House, and I remember that with anonymous sources, especially about internal sort of staff battles. But yesterday we had the President of the United States himself, not an anonymous source, questioning, well, I don't know if it's questioning. Let me ask you, what was he trying to say when he was talking to Michael Goodwin, the New York Post columnist, about Steve Bannon, his chief strategist, and saying, I like Steve, but, you know, if I heard that as press secretary, I think, that's what comes after but?
Well, I'll be very clear. I think he values Steve's commitment to the team and helping to advance his agenda. But I think he also wants to make sure that everybody understands, when you look back at in the 1980s and 1990s, the policies that this president is now espousing and championing here in terms of trade policies, economic policies, are policies that he's held for, you know, in some cases 2, 3, 4 decades. And then he wants to make sure that he's very clear that he won this election because of the policies that he's been laying out for decades and the commitment that he's had to the American worker, to growing our economy and keeping our country safe. And I think that the line had been blurred a little bit. He wanted to make it very clear, but at the same time express confidence in the team that's here and the talent that he has assembled.
I wanted to ask you about the Democrats, because they were a hard no on somebody even as reasonable and competent as Neil Gorsuch, who is now the Supreme Court Justice within the first 100 days of the administration. But they are a hard no on him, and I just wonder, how does the president plan to approach them when it comes to something that he talked about yesterday, which was going forward with changes to health care, but also more importantly, possibly, is tax reform?
Well, on both issues, I think Democrats have here in Washington have a choice to make. It's whether or not they continue to be, exhibit obstructionism and stand in the way of progress, or whether or not that there are issues like tax reform and health care reform. And look, you take them one at a time. Health care reform is going bankrupt. The way that the Obamacare system is set up, it's continuing to reveal fewer choices for the American people. Premiums are going up, and the infrastructure that keeps it together is crumbling. It's costing more and more to keep it, to even piece it together. The president's laid out a hand and said that people who want to work together to help achieve a common goal, he wants to work with them. And on tax reform, I think it's a very similar story. I mean, I think we recognize that on a corporate side, our businesses aren't competitive in the global world. We need to give tax relief to our corporations to help them hire and expand and relocate here in the United States. And we additionally have to help middle-class taxpayers who have really been bearing the brunt of this economy in the last 2 years of the Obama administration. So if members of Congress on either side of the aisle want to join with this president to grow the economy, to put people back to work, then he wants to extend a hand and have them help.
Sean, yesterday you made an error in the briefing when talking about atrocities committed by the Syrian President Assad when you compared it to Hitler. And you immediately corrected that mistake. And I thought your apology was quite sincere and genuine. Now, it was quite interesting to me that all 3 networks last night led the news with that mistake and that apology rather than the other news. But, okay, setting that aside, when did you know, at what point in the briefing yesterday did you know that you had something that you had to fix?
There's 2 pieces of it, I guess, and I'm not focused so much on that, Dana, as you know. I mean, I think I recognize that I made a mistake, but I think it's twofold. One is obviously there's a personal factor here. There's a lot of people that took offense to that. I wanted to make sure that those people understood that that was clearly not my intent. But more importantly, or not more importantly, but equally, I think that to your point, we've been having a great week here advancing the president's agenda. He's done a phenomenal job of reasserting our place in the world and making sure that we help millions of people who need help as we continue to combat ISIS, help the people in Syria. And it was just unfortunate that my mistake helped create a distraction from the great work that he's doing for this country and frankly throughout the world. So I knew that it needed to be fixed, and I sincerely not just regret that what I did to other people about my own mistake, but also obviously it's a mistake and you let down the president who you serve, because my job is to help do what I can to advance this thing, not get in the way of it. Unfortunately, yesterday I did just that.
But Sean, were you a little harder on yourself than even the president was? I mean, did you have a chance to talk to him?
I did. He is one of the most gracious bosses and leaders that you could imagine. But you're right. You are hard on yourself when you realize, and you know this better than anybody, Dana, this is an awesome responsibility and a great privilege and honor to have this position. And I think when you are guilty of making a mistake, you recognize that, at least for me, little bit hard on myself because I realized that I was a distraction from the great work that this president has and continues to do on behalf of this country. And when you overshadow his accomplishments and the commitments that he's making to put people back to work, to reform health care, on education, and keeping this country safe in so many ways, you know, you have to reflect and just, you know that you are a distraction to his great work and the privilege and honor that he's given me. So it's disappointing to myself, and I hope people will not only
I do think you're a little harder on yourself than you need to be, but especially because I immediately identified it. I do think that just looking back for me, I think one of the things I most learned in that job, or the most important lessons, were about dignity and graciousness, empathy, and certainly humility. There's no job that will humble you like the White House press secretary's job. Is there anything else that you've learned so far? You're about 83 days into the administration. Does anything surprise you?
No, I think you gave me some very sage advice during this process, and I think it really is. I think you've got to go in every day and be prepared as you can be. You got a lot of homework to do every day. You're trying to represent this government, the American people, the president, making sure that you understand the key issues at hand, and frankly, some of the issues that haven't bubbled up to the top, but you're as prepared as possible. And that you're as focused as possible. And obviously, you see sometimes what happens when you're not. But it is an awesome responsibility. It takes a lot of hard work every day, and you do your best to represent this president, this White House, this administration, and this country. And
it does feel, in some ways, the press is just slightly ahead of where the policy making is. So that because events have moved so quickly, especially on the foreign policy front, sort of swamping other things, then you've got the continued Russia investigation and all the other unknowns that you have out there.
Well, that's right. But I think, again, if you actually stop and look at what the president's been able to accomplish over the last 10 days, you know, 3 world leaders come in last week. Where we're making tremendous progress, and it's amazing how many of these world leaders the president meets with. And they talk about rebuilding a relationship that the U.S. has lacked for the last 8 years, and they're so excited to reestablish that, work with this president to advance shared goals, whether it's economic or national security ones. And the president had a tremendous week last week, and then obviously he took very decisive, justified, and proportional response with Syria that just really got huge praise from around the world. So he continues to make great traction. I think what we did today continues to show that with this alliance with NATO.
All right, Sean, get home to Rebecca.